In the spring of 2011, a mountain lion was struck and killed by a vehicle on the Wilbur Cross Parkway in Milford, Connecticut. The animal was a young male, approximately 3 years old, in good physical condition, with no outward signs of captivity. Wildlife officials from the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection responded to the scene and initially proceeded under the assumption that the animal was either an escaped captive or a pet. If what you just heard makes you want to keep going, stay here. This is exactly the kind of content we make, and there is a lot more of it. Subscribe now so you do not miss what comes next. Mountain lions had been absent from Connecticut for well over a century. The last confirmed wild mountain lion in New England had been killed in 1881. The idea that a wild mountain lion had simply arrived in Connecticut on its own, without anyone having seen it cross the dozens of state lines that separated Connecticut from any established mountain lion population, seemed so remote as to be essentially dismissible. Then the DNA results came back. The animal was not an escaped captive. Its genetic profile matched the mountain lion population of the Black Hills of South Dakota with a precision that left no interpretive ambiguity. Subsequent analysis of additional DNA evidence, some of it collected from locations the animal had passed through before reaching Connecticut, allowed researchers to reconstruct a route. The mountain lion had traveled approximately 2,450 kilometers from its point of origin in the Black Hills, across the northern Great Plains, through Wisconsin and Minnesota, through upstate New York, and into southern New England. It had crossed interstate highways, rivers, agricultural landscapes, suburban corridors, and the full width of several states that contain no mountain lions, and had not contained mountain lions within living memory. It had done this alone, silently, without being reliably detected by the human population of one of the most densely inhabited regions of the United States, until the moment it walked in front of a car on a Connecticut parkway and died. The distance involved is not the most remarkable part of this story, though the distance is genuinely extraordinary. Young male mountain lions are known to disperse widely from their birth territories. Dispersal events of several hundred kilometers have been documented multiple times in the western United States and Canada. But 2,450 kilometers represents something categorically different from a large dispersal. It represents one of the longest confirmed overland movements of any large carnivore in the recorded history of North American wildlife. It represents an animal crossing the full ecological width of a continent, navigating terrain that no member of its species had been known to cross in over a century, doing so without GPS telemetry that researchers could follow in real time, leaving behind only traces of physical evidence that were assembled into a coherent picture only after the animal was dead. The journey of the Connecticut mountain lion is one of the most remarkable individual animal movements ever documented in North America, and it sits at the intersection of several of the most consequential questions in contemporary wildlife biology. Questions about range expansion, questions about dispersal behavior and the role of young males in driving species recovery, questions about what it means for a large predator to navigate a landscape that has been fundamentally and continuously reorganized by human development over the course of a century. Questions about what the population biology of mountain lions in the eastern United States looks like, whether it looks like anything at all yet, and what it might look like in 50 years if the conditions producing events like this one continue to develop in the direction they appear to be heading. If you find this kind of thing compelling, if the intersection of animal behavior, landscape ecology, and the complicated history of large predators in North America is something you want to keep thinking about, subscribe now. There is a great deal more of this ahead. The mountain lion that died in Connecticut in 2011 had a backstory that began in a place almost perfectly opposite to Connecticut in every ecological and cultural sense. The Black Hills of South Dakota are a forested island, rising from the Great Plains, a landmass of roughly 6,200 square kilometers of ponderosa pine forest, granite peaks, and deep canyon systems that has been the core of a recovering mountain lion population since the 1970s. The Black Hills population is one of the easternmost established mountain lion populations in North America. It sits at the edge of the species' current range, separated from the Rocky Mountain populations to the west by the open plains of Wyoming and from any eastern populations, to the extent those exist, by the entire width of the Great Plains and the Midwest. The population is not large. Estimates of mountain lion density in the Black Hills have ranged between 2 and 3 animals per 100 square kilometers in the areas of highest density, producing a total population for the region in the range of several hundred individuals. It is a functional, reproducing, relatively stable population that has been producing surplus young animals for decades, and those surplus young animals have to go somewhere. The dispersal imperative in young male mountain lions is one of the most powerful and least fully understood behavioral drives in North American mammalogy. When a young male mountain lion reaches sexual maturity, typically between the ages of 1.5 and 3 years, it is expelled from or voluntarily leaves its birth territory under pressure from resident adult males that will kill juvenile males they encounter in their territory. The young male must find unoccupied territory, and in a landscape where mountain lion territories are often already fully occupied, finding unoccupied territory means moving. Sometimes it means moving a very long way. The energetic cost of extended dispersal is significant. The risk of mortality from vehicles, from encounters with resident males in territories being crossed, from starvation if the dispersal moves into terrain where prey is scarce, is substantial. Dispersing young males represent the highest mortality demographic in any mountain lion population. They are also the demographic responsible for every recorded instance of mountain lion range expansion over the past century. They are, simultaneously, the animals most likely to die and the animals most likely to find something genuinely new. The genetic record shows that the mountain lion has repeatedly used this mechanism, the expendable young male pushed hard against the edge of the species' range, to extend that range into new areas. The re-establishment of mountain lion populations in areas where they had been absent is almost always initiated by dispersing young males arriving from an established source population, surviving long enough to be detected, and eventually, if the conditions are right, being followed by females and establishing a breeding presence. The re-establishment is slow, it is cryptic, it produces a long period of sparse detections that skeptics consistently interpret as escaped captives or misidentifications before the population reaches the density at which the evidence becomes undeniable. This pattern has played out in multiple regions over the past 40 years, and the Connecticut case represents either the leading edge of a similar pattern playing out in the eastern United States, or an isolated event without successors, and the distinction between those two possibilities is one of the most actively contested questions in North American wildlife biology. To understand why the Connecticut mountain lion's journey matters beyond its individual drama, it is necessary to understand something about what the eastern United States used to contain and what it contains now. Before European colonization, mountain lions were present throughout eastern North America, from southern Canada to the Florida Peninsula. They occupied the deciduous forests of New England, the Appalachians, the Piedmont, the Atlantic coastal plain, the river systems of the Midwest, and the bottomland hardwood forests of the Southeast. They coexisted with the eastern elk and the white-tailed deer and the woodland caribou that constituted their primary prey base. They were systematically hunted, trapped, poisoned, and bounty killed from the colonial period through the early 20th century, in a campaign so thorough and sustained that by the time the last confirmed eastern mountain lion was killed in the Adirondacks in 1894, the species had been functionally eliminated from a range that had once extended across half a continent. The Florida panther, a geographically isolated southeastern subspecies, persists as a tiny and genetically compromised remnant in the swamps of southern Florida. Everything else is gone, or was gone, or may be in the process of not being gone anymore, depending on how you read the evidence. The eastern United States in 2024 is not the same landscape from which mountain lions were eliminated in the 19th century. It is in many ways a more hospitable landscape for large predators than it has been at any point in the past 150 years. The forests of New England, the Mid-Atlantic states, and the Appalachians have recovered dramatically from the agricultural clearing of the 19th century. Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, and much of upstate New York are more heavily forested today than they were in 1900. White-tailed deer, the prey species that would form the foundation of any re-establishing eastern mountain lion population, are present across the eastern United States in densities that have no historical precedent. The deer population in the eastern United States is estimated at somewhere between 15 and 25 million animals. Deer vehicle collisions kill approximately 1.5 million deer per year. Deer-related agricultural damage costs billions of dollars annually. The eastern landscape is carrying a prey surplus that a large predator could exploit productively, which is precisely the ecological condition that facilitates range re-establishment by carnivores arriving from outside the region. The journey that brought the Connecticut mountain lion from the Black Hills to Milford took approximately 2 years, based on the evidence assembled from multiple DNA collection points along the route. The first confirmation of the animal's presence outside the Black Hills was a photograph from a remote camera station in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan in 2009, showing a large male mountain lion moving through second-growth forest. The photograph was initially treated with the standard skepticism applied to eastern mountain lion reports, which has been consistent and sometimes disproportionate to the actual quality of the evidence. Michigan does not have mountain lions, in the institutional sense that wildlife managers apply this phrase. The photograph was noted, filed, and not followed up with intensive tracking effort. The animal moved on. The next confirmed detection came from a remote camera in Wisconsin in 2010. Same story. Then, the animal appeared on a driveway camera in Greenwich, Connecticut, months before the Parkway strike. Same story. And then the car on the Wilbur Cross Parkway resolved all the ambiguity at once, because a dead animal on a highway shoulder cannot walk away, cannot be dismissed as a misidentification, and cannot be explained without DNA. The DNA told a story that wildlife managers had not been expecting to tell, and that had implications extending well beyond the individual animal lying dead on a Connecticut roadway. It confirmed that a mountain lion from an established western population had successfully navigated 2,450 kilometers of fragmented, human-dominated, mountain lion-absent landscape, and arrived in a region with millions of white-tailed deer, tens of thousands of square kilometers of suitable forest habitat, and a human population that had not thought about mountain lions as a realistic part of its local ecology for over a century. The animal had found everything it needed to establish territory except a mate. It had arrived alone, as dispersing males always do. It had traveled through landscapes that have never been surveyed for mountain lion presence, with anything approaching the intensity needed to detect a single, secretive, wide-ranging individual moving through at dispersal speed. It was almost certainly not the only mountain lion to have made a similar journey without documentation. It was simply the one that was confirmed by a set of circumstances impossible to explain away. The question that follows from this, the question that wildlife biologists in a dozen states quietly wrestle with, against a backdrop of institutional skepticism and political sensitivity, is how many others have made similar journeys without leaving evidence that survived to be collected. Mountain lions are extraordinarily difficult to document in terrain where they are not expected. The survey methods that reliably detect mountain lions in the West, track surveys in snow, remote camera arrays specifically positioned on travel corridors, response investigations triggered by livestock kills, do not exist in most of the eastern United States, because wildlife managers have not allocated resources to search for animals that institutional consensus holds are not there. The circular logic of this situation is visible to researchers working on the margins of it. We do not find mountain lions in the East because we do not look for mountain lions in the East, because we do not believe mountain lions are in the East, because we do not find them. The Connecticut case cracked that circle open at one point, but it did not shatter it. The institutional default in most eastern states remains deep skepticism toward mountain lion reports, and that skepticism has a real effect on the quality of the evidence that gets collected and evaluated. The reports themselves are not scarce. State wildlife agencies in the eastern United States receive mountain lion sighting reports every year, in volumes that have been increasing steadily since the 1990s. Kentucky, Tennessee, Missouri, Arkansas, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, and New England states all receive reports. The overwhelming majority of these reports are dismissed by wildlife managers as misidentified bobcats, domestic cats, dogs, or simple fabrications. Some proportion of those dismissals are certainly correct. The misidentification rate for large felids in areas where mountain lions are not expected is well documented and is significant. People see large cats where there are no large cats. This is a real phenomenon. It does not explain every report. It is applied as an explanation to every report by agencies that have neither the resources nor, in some cases, the institutional will to investigate each one with the rigor that would distinguish a genuine detection from a misidentification. The result is an evidence record in the eastern United States that is simultaneously voluminous and largely inconclusive, because the follow-up work that converts a sighting report into a confirmed detection has not been systematically done. The exceptions are instructive. In the cases where wildlife managers or independent researchers have followed up aggressively on mountain lion reports in the eastern United States, they have found physical evidence at rates that are difficult to reconcile with a pure misidentification explanation. Track casts collected in Missouri, Arkansas, and Kansas following sighting reports have been analyzed by mountain lion specialists and confirmed as consistent with mountain lion tracks in a significant proportion of cases. Remote camera photographs collected from private land in Arkansas and Missouri following sighting reports have produced images that specialists have assessed as consistent with mountain lions in multiple instances. None of this rises to the level of the Connecticut confirmation, a dead animal with DNA, but it accumulates into a pattern that independent researchers take more seriously than the official position in most eastern states reflects. The official position in most eastern states, with the partial exception of Missouri, which has gradually shifted its language to acknowledge occasional transient mountain lions from the western population, is that there are no mountain lions in the east outside of Florida. The official position in Missouri now acknowledges transient individuals while stopping short of claiming a resident population. The distinction between a transient and a resident matters enormously to wildlife management agencies because a resident population triggers regulatory obligations, consultation requirements, and potential conflicts with existing land management frameworks that a transient individual does not. The institutional incentive structure, in other words, runs strongly toward acknowledging the minimum level of mountain lion presence that the evidence absolutely requires, and no more. This is not a conspiracy. It is the predictable output of an institutional system designed to manage known resources within established frameworks, encountering evidence of something that disrupts those frameworks. The disruption is being managed by minimizing its acknowledged scale. The evidence that would require a larger acknowledgement is not being systematically collected. Against this backdrop, the Black Hills population continues to produce dispersing young males at a rate consistent with a population operating at or above carrying capacity. The documented dispersal record from the Black Hills over the past 2 decades shows animals moving east into Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan, in numbers that represent only the confirmed detections, specifically those that resulted in a dead animal with verifiable DNA or a live animal caught on camera, with sufficient image quality to rule out alternatives. Each of those confirmed cases represents an unknown multiple of unconfirmed cases involving animals that moved through the same terrain at the same time without leaving detectable evidence. The dispersal pressure from the Black Hills is not an occasional event producing one remarkable animal every decade. It is a continuous output of the population, producing animals moving east in modest but real numbers, navigating a gauntlet of vehicles, human development, rivers, and unfamiliar terrain, dying in large proportions before completing any significant portion of the journey, and occasionally, in the tail of the distribution, traveling so far and surviving so long that they arrive somewhere genuinely extraordinary. The 2,450-kilometer figure attached to the Connecticut mountain lion's journey is worth dwelling on for a moment because it encodes something important about what dispersal really means at the extreme end of the distribution. At average walking speed for a mountain lion moving through open terrain, covering 2,450 kilometers, requires months of continuous movement. This animal was not walking continuously. It was doing what dispersing mountain lions do: moving, stopping, hunting, resting, moving again, responding to terrain and prey and threats with the behavioral flexibility that characterizes a highly adaptable predator. It was eating deer in Wisconsin and Minnesota and upstate New York. It was sleeping somewhere during the days it spent in the Chicago metropolitan area, because the evidence places its route through the greater Chicago region. It was crossing roads and rivers and farmland and suburban developments across the full width of the continent, adjusting its behavior continuously to the novel challenges presented by a landscape its species had not inhabited in quantity for a century. The animal's competence in navigating this landscape, the behavioral flexibility and the physical endurance, and the hunting skill that sustained it across 2,450 kilometers of largely unfamiliar terrain, is the thing that the bare DNA result does not convey, but that deserves explicit recognition. This was not a lost animal stumbling toward its death. It was a highly capable predator executing a complex behavioral program against enormous odds and nearly succeeding. What it failed to find was a mate, and that is the biological fact that determines whether the Connecticut case is a historical curiosity or the beginning of something larger. A single dispersing male, however far it travels, does not establish a population. Population establishment requires females, which are far less likely to disperse long distances, which produce litters, which result in offspring that stay in or near the established range. The documented movement records for female mountain lions in the Black Hills and the surrounding plains show dispersal distances that are dramatically smaller than the male dispersal distances. Females move shorter distances, establish home ranges closer to their birth territories, and are much less likely to undertake the kind of multi-year, multi-thousand-kilometer odyssey that brought the Connecticut mountain lion to its end on a parkway in New England. For a mountain lion population to establish in the eastern United States, males from the western source population must not only arrive, they must arrive in sufficient numbers to be followed by females, expanding the range incrementally eastward, in a process that would likely take decades and that requires the landscape connectivity to sustain it. The landscape connectivity question brings the discussion to something that has been largely absent from public conversations about eastern mountain lion recolonization, but that determines whether it is biologically possible at all. Mountain lions moving east from the Black Hills must cross the Great Plains, which present a different kind of challenge than the forested mountains and dissected topography of the Black Hills themselves. The Great Plains are not impassable for mountain lions. The Connecticut mountain lion crossed them. But they are challenging terrain for a species that relies heavily on cover, that hunts prey concentrated along wooded river corridors, and that is exposed to high vehicle mortality on the network of highways crossing the plains, with a density that reflects a century of agricultural and energy development infrastructure. The survival probability of a dispersing mountain lion crossing the Great Plains is not zero, but it is low enough to represent a significant filter on the flow of animals from west to east. The animals that survive the crossing are not a random sample of the dispersing population. They are a selected subset, the most capable navigators, the most successful hunters, the most effective at avoiding vehicles. The animals with whatever suite of behavioral characteristics, or fortunate luck, or some combination of both, allowed them to cross terrain that killed a high proportion of their contemporaries. The Connecticut mountain lion was one of those animals, and the fact that it died on a highway at the end of its journey rather than on a highway somewhere in the middle is a reminder that the vehicle mortality filter operates at every point along the route, not just in the most dangerous terrain. The animal navigated 2,450 kilometers of some of the most heavily trafficked highway infrastructure in the world, only to be struck by a car on a secondary parkway in suburban Connecticut. The margin between a successful dispersal and a fatal one is sometimes measured not in thousands of kilometers of behavioral competence, but in the timing of a single road crossing. And that is the kind of thing that cannot be systematically trained or selected for. It is the final stochastic element in a journey governed largely by skill and adaptability and ended by chance. The question of whether female mountain lions will follow dispersing males into the eastern United States is not purely academic. The recovery of large predators in regions from which they were eliminated has proceeded in the American West through a combination of active reintroduction, as in the case of wolves in Yellowstone, and natural recolonization driven by dispersing individuals from source populations, as in the case of mountain lion expansion into California's coastal ranges from the Sierra Nevada foothills. The natural recolonization model has worked in the West, in large part because the West retains substantial corridors of connected habitat that allow animals to move between source populations and expanding range frontiers, without crossing the kind of matrix of dense human development and fragmented land ownership that characterizes much of the Midwest and East. The question is whether the eastern landscape, with its recovering forests, its surplus deer population, and its patchwork of protected and semi-protected land, retains enough connectivity to support the incremental range expansion that would be required for mountain lions to eventually re-establish a breeding presence east of the Great Plains. Modeling studies published in the past decade have produced answers that range from cautiously optimistic to pessimistic, depending on the assumptions built into the model. Studies using habitat suitability modeling to identify corridors capable of supporting mountain lion movement from the Black Hills to the Appalachians have found that suitable habitat patches exist across much of the route, but that the connectivity between those patches depends heavily on the maintenance of wooded river corridors, the reduction of vehicle mortality on key crossing zones, and the absence of intensive lethal management by humans responding to perceived threats to livestock or personal safety. Studies using population viability modeling to estimate whether an eastern mountain lion population could sustain itself once established have generally found that the eastern United States could support a substantial mountain lion population in terms of prey availability and habitat area, but that population viability would be strongly sensitive to human tolerance for the species, specifically whether human-caused mortality through vehicles and shooting would be kept below the level that would prevent population establishment. The human tolerance dimension of this is not a minor variable. It is, in the view of most researchers who have looked carefully at the Eastern recolonization question, the determining variable. Mountain lions can cross the Great Plains. They can survive in eastern forests. They can hunt eastern deer with the same effectiveness they bring to hunting western ungulates. The biological obstacles to eastern mountain lion recolonization are real, but not prohibitive. The human obstacles are different in character. The eastern United States has a human population density dramatically higher than the areas where mountain lions currently live in the West. It has a cultural and historical relationship with large predators that has been defined by elimination rather than coexistence. It has millions of people who have never thought seriously about sharing their landscape with a large predatory felid, and who might react in ways that are difficult to predict when confronted with evidence that they are doing so. The wolf reintroduction debates in the Northeast over the past 2 decades have provided some preview of what that conversation might look like, and the preview is not uniformly encouraging for advocates of large predator recovery. The wolf debates in New York and New England have revealed deep divisions between wildlife biologists who see the ecological and biological case for wolf recovery as compelling, conservation advocates who see it as a moral obligation, rural landowners and farmers who see it as a threat to livestock and livelihoods, and hunters who see it as a threat to deer populations that support a substantial recreational and cultural economy. Mountain lions would enter this landscape carrying a set of associations and anxieties that are different from, but not less intense than those attached to wolves. They are larger than wolves. They are less visible, more cryptic, more likely to be present near human activity without being known to be present. They provoke a different kind of fear in some people, a more visceral fear related to the possibility of ambush and sudden violence that is not entirely disconnected from the biological reality of how mountain lions hunt. The attacks on humans by mountain lions in the East, before the species was eliminated, were not extensively documented in the colonial and early American period, partly because the documentation infrastructure was thin and partly because interactions between settlers and mountain lions in the 18th and early 19th centuries were more likely to result in the mountain lion being shot than in a written record being preserved. What historical accounts exist suggest that mountain lions in the East behaved similarly to mountain lions in the West today, which is to say, they were extremely effective at avoiding humans, were occasionally killed near settlements when they took domestic livestock, and were almost never involved in attacks on people. The rare documented cases of mountain lions menacing or attacking humans in the colonial East involved circumstances similar to those documented in the contemporary West: lone individuals, children, animals that had been cornered or wounded. The baseline of extreme rarity appears to have been as true for eastern mountain lions in the 18th century as it is for western mountain lions today. That baseline matters for how the conversation about eastern mountain lion recolonization should be structured, because the fear of large predator attack, specifically the fear of a mountain lion attacking a child or a runner or a dog walker, in a suburban or exurban context, is the fear most likely to generate political resistance to allowing mountain lion recovery to proceed without aggressive human management intervention. The fear is not irrational. Mountain lions are capable of attacking humans and occasionally do. But the historical record, across 4 centuries and both continental ranges, is as consistent and as clear as a biological record can be. Mountain lions do not prey on humans. They avoid humans. They have evolved in the presence of humans for 10,000 years, and the behavioral template that keeps them away from humans, that makes them hide, retreat, disappear, and melt into the landscape rather than attack, is as deeply embedded in the species' behavioral repertoire as any characteristic it possesses. The 27 people killed by mountain lions in 4 centuries of North American recorded history are not evidence that mountain lions are a serious danger to human populations. They are evidence that even a species with a profound behavioral aversion to attacking humans will occasionally attack humans under specific, identifiable conditions. Conditions that are almost entirely avoidable with appropriate behavioral awareness, and that become more common under specific ecological conditions that can themselves be managed. The eastern United States, that a re-establishing mountain lion population would enter, is not the eastern United States of 1700 or 1800. It is a landscape that has been profoundly reorganized by a century and a half of industrial and post-industrial development, and that contains features, highways, dense residential development at the forest edge, suburban deer populations habituated to human proximity, a human population with no lived experience of large predators in their local landscape, that have no historical precedent in the mountain lion's eastern experience. Managing the risks associated with mountain lion presence in that novel landscape requires the kind of proactive, honest communication that the history of large predator reintroduction debates in North America has not always featured. It requires telling people the truth, that mountain lions are extraordinarily unlikely to attack them, that the risk is real but extremely small, that the appropriate behavioral responses are known and effective, and that the conditions under which the risk elevates are identifiable and avoidable. It requires doing this before the first confirmed sighting in a given jurisdiction rather than after, because the announcement that mountain lions are present in a region is received very differently by a population that has been educated about what that presence means than by a population encountering the information cold. The Connecticut mountain lion died in 2011. In the years since, the confirmed detections of mountain lions in the Midwest and eastern United States have continued to accumulate. A mountain lion was struck by a vehicle in Missouri in 2017. Another was killed in Iowa in 2013. Confirmed detections have been recorded in Nebraska, Kansas, Arkansas, and several other states that are not part of the species' current recognized range. Each of these confirmations represents a data point in a picture that, viewed in aggregate, looks less like a series of isolated anomalous events and more like the opening phase of a range expansion that is being driven by the same demographic pressure, the same surplus of dispersing young males from the Black Hills, and, increasingly, from the growing mountain lion population of the northern Rocky Mountain states that produced the Connecticut animal. The picture is not yet clear enough to constitute proof of a trend in the scientific sense. The detections are still sparse enough that they could, individually and perhaps collectively, be characterized as outliers. But the direction is consistent. The frequency is slowly increasing. The geographic reach is slowly extending. And the institutional framework for thinking about eastern mountain lion presence is slowly, and with considerable institutional friction, beginning to shift. The management implications of that shift are being worked out in real time in state wildlife agencies across the Midwest and East, and the process is not always graceful. Agencies that have spent decades telling the public there are no mountain lions in their state face a difficult communication challenge when a dead mountain lion appears on a highway in their jurisdiction. The instinct to treat each confirmed detection as exceptional, as a one-time event with no broader implications, is understandable from a communication management standpoint and is biologically untenable as a long-term position. The evidence will eventually require a public accounting that the current institutional posture is not prepared to deliver. The agencies that make that accounting proactively, that develop public education and response protocols for mountain lion presence before the evidence forces their hand, are the ones that will manage the transition most effectively. The agencies that wait until the evidence is undeniable before acknowledging that mountain lions exist in their jurisdiction are the ones that will find themselves managing the communication fallout from what looks, in retrospect, like a deliberate concealment, whether it was or not. The animals themselves are not waiting for the institutional framework to catch up. The dispersal events that produced the Connecticut mountain lion's journey are continuing to occur. The demographic pressure in the Black Hills population is, if anything, greater now than it was when the Connecticut animal was born, because the population has continued to grow against a prey base that does not grow proportionately and a territory structure that does not expand. The young males being pushed out of the Black Hills today are moving into the same landscape the Connecticut animal navigated, a landscape that has not changed in any fundamental way since 2011, except that some of the animals crossing it have slightly better odds because the remaining suitable habitat patches along the route have not yet been eliminated by development. The journey is still brutal. The mortality rate among dispersing males is still high, but the source population is still producing dispersers. The habitat along the route still provides enough cover and prey to sustain a minority of them, and the eastern forests they are moving toward are still full of deer and largely empty of mountain lions. What the Connecticut mountain lion's journey means in the largest frame depends on what you are willing to see in it. If you see it as an isolated event, a statistical tale, a once-in-a-generation anomaly produced by an unusual combination of circumstances, then it means something small and local, a remarkable individual animal, a confirmed data point in the dispersal record, a reminder that mountain lions are capable of covering extraordinary distances when the biological imperative is strong enough. If you see it as a data point in a larger pattern, as evidence that the demographic and ecological conditions producing long-distance eastern dispersal events are structural rather than occasional, then it means something considerably larger. It means that the eastern United States is in the early stages of a process that the West went through decades ago, the gradual, cryptic, initially contested re-establishment of a large predator in a landscape that was declared empty of that predator but was never biologically incompatible with it. It means that the question of whether mountain lions will eventually re-establish a breeding presence in the East is not primarily a question of biology, but a question of politics, culture, and the willingness of a human population with no living memory of large predators to make room for one. And it means that the conversations that will determine the answer to that question are happening now, in wildlife management offices and state legislatures and hunting community forums and conservation advocacy organizations, being shaped by assumptions and fears and institutional interests that the Connecticut mountain lion knew nothing about when it crossed the first of the 100 highways it would need to survive to reach the forests of New England. The animal's route, reconstructed from the DNA evidence, passes through places that are interesting to think about individually. It passed through the Chicago metropolitan area. The Greater Chicago region has a human population of approximately 10 million people. It contains some of the most intensively developed urban land in North America. It also contains, threaded through the development along its major river systems, a network of forest preserves and riparian corridors that have been documented as movement pathways for coyotes, white-tailed deer, wild turkeys, and a range of other species whose ability to persist in an urban context depends on exactly the kind of connected greenway infrastructure that Chicago has been building for decades. The mountain lion navigated this system, apparently without being reliably detected, moving through forest preserves and river corridors at night, crossing roads in darkness, threading through the spaces between development that the development planners had not considered as large predator corridors because large predators were not part of the planning imagination. The fact that it got through tells you something about both the animal's capability and the landscape's residual connectivity. Chicago's forest preserve system was not designed with mountain lion dispersal in mind. It worked for mountain lion dispersal anyway. The same is true in various ways at multiple points along the route. Upstate New York contains vast areas of forest, much of it in the Adirondack and Catskill regions, that represents genuine mountain lion habitat in every biological sense. The Adirondack Park alone covers 6 million acres, making it larger than several western states and containing a white-tailed deer population that has recovered dramatically from the hunting pressure of the early 20th century. The mountain lion that died in Connecticut passed through or near this region without being reliably detected, which is either a testament to the species' cryptic habits or a reflection of the inadequacy of the survey effort, or both. The Adirondacks have received mountain lion sighting reports at a consistent rate for decades. Wildlife managers in New York have consistently dismissed them. The Connecticut case did not substantially change that institutional posture. The residual effect of the most dramatic confirmed eastern mountain lion detection of the modern era on the institutional framework for thinking about mountain lions in the eastern United States has been, to put it generously, modest. The modest institutional response to the Connecticut confirmation is itself a data point worth examining. The DNA confirmation should have, by any reasonable scientific standard, triggered a significant re-examination of the evidence base for mountain lion presence in eastern states between the Black Hills and Connecticut. If one animal made the journey, the probability that no others had made similar journeys without confirmation is not high. The appropriate institutional response was intensive survey work along known dispersal corridors, a systematic review of unresolved sighting reports in Midwest and eastern states, with the hindsight that a confirmed dispersal event provided, and a public communication effort that honestly acknowledged what the Connecticut case implied about the plausibility of mountain lion presence in eastern states. None of these responses occurred at the scale the confirmation warranted. The event was acknowledged, the DNA was confirmed, the animal's remarkable journey was widely reported in the media for a news cycle or two, and then the institutional default returned to its prior position. The confirmed individual was exceptional. The institutional assumption that eastern states have no mountain lions remained intact. The survey work was not done. The sighting reports were not revisited. The public communication did not change. This represents, in the view of the researchers who have looked most carefully at the Eastern recolonization question, a missed opportunity of some consequence. The window in which public and institutional preparation for mountain lion presence in eastern states can occur in advance of that presence becoming undeniable is not unlimited. The process of range expansion, if it is proceeding, will eventually produce evidence that cannot be managed within the existing institutional framework, either a breeding detection or a human encounter or a cluster of confirmations close enough in time and geography to require a different kind of response. The preparation that should be happening now, the public education, the protocol development, the human mountain lion coexistence planning that Western states did not do adequately and paid for in poorly managed conflicts and preventable attacks, is not happening in the East because the institutional acknowledgement that it is needed has not been made. The Western experience of mountain lion range recovery is the closest available model for what Eastern recolonization might look like, and it contains lessons that are not all encouraging. In California, where the hunting ban of 1990 was followed by genuine population recovery and range expansion into areas where mountain lions had not been present in decades, the institutional framework for managing human mountain lion coexistence lagged badly behind the ecological reality. Lions were expanding into coastal range and suburban foothill habitat, while wildlife managers were still operating under assumptions calibrated to a smaller, more range-restricted population. The conflicts that resulted, livestock depredation at elevated rates, the attacks involving children and pets in peri-urban areas, the encounters that made national news and produced political pressure to revisit the hunting ban, were in significant part a product of the management framework not keeping pace with the population's recovery. The lesson, which applies directly to the Eastern situation, is that preparing for mountain lion presence means developing management frameworks, communication protocols, and coexistence infrastructure before the animal arrives in significant numbers, not after the conflicts begin. In Colorado, which has been the site of some of the most significant mountain lion management debates of the past 3 decades, the experience has been different in texture, but similar in its underlying dynamic. The mountain lion population in Colorado grew substantially through the 1990s and into the 2000s, as the regulated hunting program that replaced the bounty system moderated pressure on the population, and as the state's human population grew and expanded into foothill terrain that overlapped deeply with prime mountain lion habitat. The resulting increase in human mountain lion encounters and the subset of those encounters that involved attacks or near attacks produced ongoing tension between wildlife managers committed to maintaining the population, hunting advocates with different views on appropriate population levels, and a recreation community and suburban population that wanted to use mountain lion habitat without managing that use around mountain lion behavior. The tension has not been resolved. It has produced a management regime that is somewhat more responsive to the incident data than California's, but that still struggles to communicate honestly about the directional trend in encounter risk that the incident record reflects. The Eastern recolonization story intersects with both of these Western histories. It inherits the California lesson about the consequences of management frameworks that lag behind population recovery. It inherits the Colorado lesson about the difficulty of honest communication in a context where the institutional interests run toward reassurance rather than accurate risk characterization. It faces these challenges in a region with no living experience of large predators, no existing management infrastructure for them, no cultural framework for coexistence with them, and no regulatory toolkit calibrated to their presence. Building that infrastructure and framework and toolkit in advance of need, in the period while the evidence is still sparse enough to be contested and the political will to act proactively is at its maximum, is the task that wildlife managers and conservation advocates in eastern states should be undertaking. Whether they are undertaking it, and whether the institutional momentum in favor of the prior assumption of eastern mountain lion absence is too strong to shift in time, is the central management question posed by the Connecticut mountain lion's journey. The animal itself, the specific individual that traveled 2,450 kilometers from the Black Hills to a highway in Connecticut, deserves a moment of recognition that goes beyond its value as a data point in a policy debate. It was young, probably born in the summer of 2008, to a female somewhere in the pine forests of the Black Hills. It left its birth territory, as young males must, in the early part of 2009 or thereabouts. It crossed the open country east of the Black Hills, where the ponderosa pine gives way to mixed grass prairie, probably following the Niobrara River and its tributaries, using the cottonwood and plum thickets along the drainages for cover. It crossed Nebraska, It crossed Iowa or Wisconsin. It entered the Upper Peninsula of Michigan sometime in late 2009, where a remote camera photographed it moving through second-growth forest on a November night. It moved through Michigan and into Wisconsin, hunting white-tailed deer in a landscape where deer are abundant, but where mountain lions have been absent long enough that the deer have no learned behavioral response to them. It crossed the Mississippi River, somewhere in Wisconsin or Illinois. It moved east through or around the Chicago metropolitan area. It entered Indiana or Ohio. It crossed the Appalachian foothills. It entered New York State and moved through the southern Adirondacks or the Catskills. It crossed the Hudson River. It entered Connecticut. At every point along that route, it was making decisions, not conscious, deliberate decisions, in the way that word implies in human usage, but the behavioral outputs of a nervous system continuously processing information about terrain, prey, threat, and movement, and